Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our very first webinar, Educating the Future Singer Post-COVID-19. My name is Sara Forestieri, and I am an arts administrator and soprano, currently working as the manager of children, youth, and family programs at the Canadian Opera Company, and I am very excited to be moderating today's webinar. This event is hosted by Women on the Verge, a fabulous trio of female musicians, performers, teachers, and mentors who I am fortunate to call my friends and colleagues. So thank you to Emily Martin, Elizabeth Mcdonald, and Catherine Tramell for hosting the discussion today. We'd like to take a moment to acknowledge Black, Indigenous, and people of color in our singing community. It is important to call out the fact that our industry and art form in particular has a known practice of racism and discrimination on and off stage, and we must call it out. As white artists, we know that it is our responsibility to educate ourselves so that we are better equipped to stand alongside our Black colleagues, amplify their voices, and fight to dismantle racism. This is something we are truly working on and will strive to do better. And now, before I introduce the rest of our panelists, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. Here in Canada, we typically begin all our community gatherings and performances with a land acknowledgement to recognize the traditional caretakers of the place in which we are gathering. At the Canadian Opera Company in Toronto, where I work, we have the privilege to create on the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. In this virtual setting, we are coming from many different places, and while it is obviously not possible to recognize all the lands from where everyone is tuning in from, as musicians and educators of music, our goal is really to share stories and connect through music. And as such, I think it's important to recognize the original storytellers of all the different lands across this continent, as we express our gratitude to them for being caretakers of the land that we now have the privilege to create upon, perform, and share our art. And now on to the topic of today. We all know how dramatically things have changed for this art form since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 to be a pandemic back in March. And we are adapting, attending and creating virtual concerts and performances, shifting to online teaching, and for many of us, myself included, using technological skills we didn't even know we had. But there are many questions about how this extraordinary time will affect the education of the singer going forward. When I met with our panelists to discuss some of the issues we'll be tackling today, we all agreed that we do not have the answers. This is the beginning of a huge conversation that needs to happen so that this field can continue to thrive. It's exceptional circumstances and beyond when we start adjusting to our new normal, whatever that may be. And to this end, we have decided to continue this conversation in a webinar series going forward over the next few months. These webinars will include discussions about diversity and inclusion, the role of the collaborative pianist, and hearing from students and recent grads themselves. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who has already dove into this conversation on our Facebook group of the same name, Educating the Future Singer Post-COVID-19. We will be answering some of your questions today, but again, this is just the beginning and we will be continuing this series using your questions in future webinars, so please keep them coming. If you'd like to submit questions to us directly, you can also email us at women@womenontheverge.ca. If you have any questions today during the webinar, please drop them in the Q&A box at the bottom right of your screen, and we will get to those a bit later on. We also have a chat room on the bottom left of your screen as well, which will be moderated by 1/3 of Women on the Verge, Canadian pianist Catherine Tramell. We would love it if you could introduce yourself here and let us know where you are tuning in from.
Thank you, Sara. Hello, everyone. I'm tuning in from East York in Toronto. I'd like to acknowledge Emily and Elizabeth for dreaming up this webinar and bringing it to fruition along with Sara. They have worked tirelessly. I believe it is a gift that we are being propelled into looking hard at how we are being and how we are educating in order to make plans to implement real change. I will speak to the role of the collaborative pianist and coach moving forward in future webinars. But for today, I will be on the chat and I welcome lots of discussion and comments there. See you there.
Thank you. And now I am going to introduce our wonderful panel in alphabetical order. Teresa Blume, Head of Voice at the Walnut School of Music. Stephen Carr, Associate Professor of Opera and Musical Theater Studies at the Eastman School of Music and Associate Artistic Director of Eastman Opera Theater. Michelle Markwart Deveaux from FaithCultureKiss, Studio for Voice and Acting, home of the SpeakEasy Cooperative. Aaron Humble, former member of Cantus, Assistant Professor of Voice and Director of Choirs at Minnesota State University Makato. And Robin Whiffen, Executive Director at Against the Grain Theatre in Toronto. Also participating in today's panel are the other 2/3 of women on the Verge, Canadian soprano and voice instructor at the University of Toronto, Elizabeth Mcdonald, and American soprano and assistant professor of music at Bucknell University, Emily Martin. So before we dive into questions, I'd like to go around the room and get everyone's initial thoughts and opening remarks. Emily, why don't we start with you?
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited for this webinar, this conversation. It's something I've been wanting to have for a couple of years now, and COVID just sped the process along. So thank you so much for joining us and trusting in us to have the conversation and knowing we don't have any of the answers, but we're so excited to hear from all of you as well. So my name is Emily Martin, and I teach at a private undergraduate liberal arts university with a department of music, not a school of music. We have performance degrees, and many of my students are double majors. Some go on to masters in vocal performance, while others go on to working in arts admin, music education, or become speech language pathologists. As I mentioned, I've been thinking about this question for a few years of how to educate our singers for a new world. Then COVID happened, and I knew we needed to seriously have this conversation as educators. Our program at Bucknell is centered around the traditional voice education, lessons, diction, opera, studio class, which has served all of us, including myself, very, very well. But when the majority of my students are interested in a huge variety of topics outside of voice and wonder how to incorporate those topics into their voice education, it becomes very hard to fit it all together as the coordinator of the degree and as their voice teacher. The professional singing world as we know it has already changed in the last 15 years since I was in school, and will change drastically over the next couple of years, specifically because of COVID-19. We owe it to our students to recognize that a tiered system we have been working with, university to young artist program to manager, will likely not work for almost all students going forward. For this reason, education for singers is going to require a huge reimagining in our field and the need to teach or find ways to teach subjects that many of us are not well versed in, which would include financial classes, improv, marketing. We need to find a way to recognize the whole person rather than just the voice and give students the tools to be successful no matter what they decide to do once they graduate or beyond. This discussion is very new, and I know many people have thoughts about it and maybe are even scared about it. I've already heard from many of you on Facebook page, and I'm loving the conversation, so please keep it coming. The more we can actually speak about this change together as colleagues, speak together, the better chance we have moving past the tunnel vision of a voice education and move our students into a new era that requires so many skills to be successful. Imagining what it would be like if our students didn't equate their confidence, self-esteem, and image just on how successful they are as singers or their voice, but how successful they are as artists and as people.
Thank you so much, Emily. And now I'm going to turn it over to Teresa.
Hi, it's so nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me be part of this. So my name is Teresa Blume. I am the head of the voice program at Walnut Hill School for the Arts, which is an independent boarding and day high school outside of Boston, Massachusetts. We have just under 300 students from all over the world, and they come to attend high school and get a focused in-depth study of a particular arts major, music, theater, dance, visual arts, or writing, film, and media arts. I live in the music department, so I'm head of voice, and my curriculum focuses on young high school students who want to study classical voice. My dog is barking. He's really happy to be here too. So classical high school students, as well as I support theater majors who are taking voice lessons as well. So all of my voice faculty is here on campus, and we all teach classical and musical theater voice techniques for our students. Right now, today, I think I'm going to focus mostly on the young classical singer, because I think that's why a lot of us are here today. And I've just felt that we've always told our students that they can come, they have a privilege that they can come into a private high school and really focus in depth and get sort of a conservatory experience before being in conservatory. And that will make them very well prepared if they choose to continue down that sort of traditional route of the pipeline that it's starting to be referred to, of going to a conservatory and then grad school and then a young artist program and maybe management. That track they're prepared for. But we also encourage and support and honor when they choose to pursue other things. And so I'm very happy and proud of our students that we have just as many leave going to Juilliard and Eastman as are going to Stanford and liberal arts colleges and small schools and international schools to pursue other things. And I know that I have adapted in my adult professional life. For a while, I thought that all of the other things that interested me in my individual pursuits as a classical singer were distractions, but I've actually realized that they are the things that made me more successful. It was what I was doing, and have also been the skills that I've been able to bring into my career. And I feel very fortunate to have a career that I have a job doing what I love to do with the skills that I've learned being a classical singer. So I feel like what needs to change in the future is just, instead of having students feel like they can only focus on one thing, I think it's really important to identify in young singers why they want to sing and help them remember that as they go along the way, so that they're not always just trying to be perfect and get to that moment of, when am I going to make it? But why they sing. If anything, we've noticed in the last couple of weeks that the kids are all right. They're activists. They are changing the world. They have something to say right now. And I feel like it's important for us to honor their voices, their soul voices right now as they're singing. You are an artist now. You are learning technique, which will be the foundation of everything that takes you forward in life, but you have something to say now. So in our curriculum, I try to make sure that it goes beyond just vocal technique. It's important to establish those foundational things of the people that came before. We have to learn about Schubert and Mozart and all of the beautiful art song that there is to sing. And we also have to learn how to be great colleagues, and we have to learn how to practice. And I think the practice of singing is someplace that we can really focus on at this level. For me, with my high school students, learning how to practice, how to identify, self-assess what your strengths and weaknesses are, so you know what you're good at, you know what you need to work on, how to set your goals, and how to kind of keep moving forward, because that sort of diligence and self-awareness is a skill that plays out in any career field that you're going to go on to. Yeah, I guess that's where I like to start. Is I feel like we have to educate young singers to be people with voices that have something to say.
Thank you so much, Teresa. And now I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm really excited to be here today, and thank you to Sara for moderating this great discussion, and to our panelists for saying yes when I sent out the email. In order to give you some context for my statement, I want to tell you a little bit about my teaching, where I teach. I'm a sessional lecturer at the University of Toronto. I'm a non-tenured track voice teacher there, and an hourly wage employee. I'm one of 150 sessional instructors at my faculty, teaching along with 65 or approximately 65 full-time faculty. We have approximately 600 undergrads and 300 grad students in all programs. And from any given year, there's around 100 singers, give or take. I know some of my colleagues are watching today, so if I say anything wrong, please feel free to correct me in the chat. Personally, I teach anywhere from 15 to 18 applied students per year, mostly in the undergrad program, in our performance stream, although I do have a number of singers in the opera school mastered music. And in addition to my applied teaching, I also teach a second-year voice performance class called Topics in Performance Studies, which is intended to introduce the singer to, you guessed it, topics in performance skills. And my understanding of the genesis of this course was to provide some class time to our younger undergrad singers to learn opera skills. Our first and second year singers don't have any specific classes for opera, other than maybe they'll sing an aria in their applied lesson. So I tell you this because I think it's important to note that when we're discussing making change, all of us are in different situations. And because I'm not in a tenured position and I'm an hourly wage, I come and go from a program that, although I'm hugely involved in and have so many rich conversations with my colleagues, I'm not actually at the table to make these changes. So when I think about change, I think about how can I make a change in my studio and how can I make a change in my class when it comes to the new conversations or the conversations we want to be having. So my thought right off the bat with this is that we've always talked to singers and musicians in general about having not just a plan A, but a plan B and maybe a plan C. And I argue that perhaps we need to relanguage that and say, we need to think about having a broader plan A, where we need different skills than just what was traditional, so that we have more resilient and flexible singers as they move out into the market. And we just heard Teresa say exactly that. And I think we're all kind of saying the same thing. But it's this idea that we have to change the dialogue about how we initially talk to our singers about that. So I don't have all the answers, but I have a lot of questions, and often questions come to or result in answers. And so I want to start with asking some questions that hopefully I can answer and we can answer in the dialogue as we move forward. And the first thing and the first issue is that the first thing that happens with a young singer that comes to our school is the audition. That's the first time we see them, and we rank them based on vocal potential. Yes, we do music skills and things like that, but mostly we hear them sing. That's the majority of the literal sound that's being made in the room. There's some conversation, and then after that, that's it, they're ranked. And I wonder that, what if we delve deeper into their social justice work, their community hours? In Ontario, where I live, the province of Ontario, high school students have to complete 40 community hours in order to graduate from high school. What if we were to engage with them on what their community hours were? What about their other extracurricular activities like sports? And rather than just have these listed on a resume, what if we discuss with them, how does their art intersect with those issues? How is it that they're coming to the table as an artist? The second thing that I think we need to ask ourselves is, how do we define our current market in order to assess what is needed? Are we working with 20-year-old data? Often we teach from experience. I experienced going to grad school over 20 years ago. It's a very different situation coming out of grad school now than it was then. Are we having conversations about what's actually happening in the market right now? Are we talking to our recent grads about what's out there? And are we engaging in our career that's relevant in what's happening out there? My third idea is, or question is, what is this conversation we keep having about entrepreneurship? First of all, how do we even define entrepreneurship? What does that mean? Is it a catch-all? If we have a catch-all class called entrepreneurship, is that enough to address some of the skills that we think singers need moving forward? And then how do we teach this? And then the even bigger question is, are we the right person or the right people to be teaching this? Are we entrepreneurs? Do we know what this means and how to parlay that information to our students? And within that, I wonder too, do we teach leadership within the context of an entrepreneurship class or business classes by only modeling, or are we creating opportunity for our students to lead and to be allowed to lead? My next question or point is, what is the global citizen? The global citizen that so many non-music programs talk about, that they send off into the world a global citizen. What does that mean for us as artists? And how is this relevant to our students learning their craft? And I will circle back to my initial thing about when students come in and we ask them about their social justice work and their work in the community. How are those connected, and how do we set up this stream of building these skills from year to year? And within that too, are singers able to articulate why they're doing what they're doing and what their own mission is as an artist, as a human, as a person? My next point is the idea of diversity of repertoire. One of the reasons that we started Women on the Verge was that we got really tired of singing about the same 16-year-old virgins written by dead white men. And so we've really tried to work to mine more repertoire for ourselves, and this is passed on into our teaching, more repertoire that's relevant to who we are today. So sourcing more female composers, and we're in a time where we need to be sourcing even broader than that. More Black composers and Indigenous and people of color. How do we access this or give this to our student? How do we communicate these things to our students? Do we wait for them to come to us, or can we start that conversation right off the bat in our studios and in our classes? And my sixth and final point for now is, if you don't have the authority to change your program, so in a similar situation that I'm in with respect to a larger construct of the university, how do you make all of these changes in your studio and in your courses? And I have lots of ideas, and I think we'll get to them in a few minutes, but my biggest point is that we need to start the conversation as soon as they walk into our room about what is the culture of learning in our studio and in the class. What is the culture of success? What is the culture of failure? How do we define that? And how do we define beyond whether or not they can sing a great E vowel, them as a human being and as an artist in the room? So I hope that stirs up some conversation, and I'll send it back to Sara. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So many great points. I feel like we could do a webinar on each one of those, and I know we're going to dig into a lot of those really soon. So thank you. Next, let's hear from Stephen.
Hello, everyone. Already so many important questions floating out there. I can't wait to dig in more, so I'll try to keep these opening remarks as brief as I can. If you are like me, then when COVID hit, it was all about triage. It was panic. It was sort of, how can I educate myself about this technology? How can I rework my syllabi to accomplish the same goals by the end of the year that I had in this new world in which we're living? So I revamped my acting classes to be about monologue work. I tried to steer away from synchronous meetings because I have students in China and on the West Coast. And so it was really just sort of survival mode there for the last couple of months of the semester. But I think we're at an interesting place now where we've survived and we can sort of take a breath and look back at these past few months that we've been through and figure out what is working and what is actually helpful and what are some things that we want to take going forward and continue to use. So one of my jobs here is as a stage director, and we are currently faced with this question of how to plan an opera season with so many question marks still in the air about the specifics of what we're going to be facing in the fall. So one of my first big aha realizations in using Zoom and in this new virtual world in which we live is that the ease and the value of having guest artists zoom into conversations. So in addition to our regular curricular classes, we also offered a weekly sort of volunteer sign-up discussion forum. And we would ask the students to watch a documentary, and then if you want to, join us for a conversation. And it gave us a chance to really talk in depth about a lot of the questions, the larger questions like the ones we're discussing here today, about our art form that we don't usually have a chance to really delve into in depth in a typical rehearsal period or when things are in person. So the ease of bringing in guests, because I think before my mentality was sort of like, how can we get this person to come to campus and stay for a few days and give a master class? And of course that is still preferable to be in person, but there is great value in using this technology, I think, to bring new people into the room. And also the ability to talk about some of these other in-depth questions, sort of macro philosophical questions about opera in a context of these Zoom sessions. So to fast forward now, trying to plan an opera season, what we're thinking about doing here at Eastman is we've reached out to some composers, and we've asked these composers who are prominent composers of opera and art song, so vocal music, to sort of curate a program of solo vocal music that they consider to be stageable, so that there may be some sort of thematic thread that unites these pieces. There may be some sort of linear narrative to them, but there doesn't have to be. But these are pieces that can be staged or explored in whatever format we find ourselves in the fall. So best case scenario, if we're in person, they can be performing on stage one at a time with a set behind them and projection. But if we're not able to be in person, they can still perform these pieces. They can still have a part in designing their own projection design, and they can still have this experience of working one-on-one with a prominent composer of opera or art song. So even though we can't have, and barring some miracle, a traditional in-person operatic experience in the fall, what we're hoping to do is take those things that have worked in this world of Zoom and exploit them in some sort of performance project that will hopefully feel fulfilling to our young singers in an equally fulfilling way as an in-person performance. So that chance to work one-on-one with a composer, to talk one-on-one with your projection designer, to see that production side of opera, we hope that that's creating an experience that is a new form of fulfilling artistic experience for our students in the fall. I also just want to take a quick second to acknowledge that this period for me has made me realize and value anew the things about opera that are not recreatable online. So for me, the most sacred things about our art form are the rituals of coming together as a group in person, of all of the teamwork it takes to put on this most collaborative art forms, of that shared electrical silence of an audience who are sitting there together in that moment when the house lights go out before the curtain goes up. That is not replicable online, right? And so I think that's okay to acknowledge that, and to, when we do ever return to being able to do that in person, to revisit it with a new appreciation. I will stop there because I'd love to get more into the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That's great. We already have some questions in the Q&A about the more traditional aspects versus the new technology that we're experiencing. So we'll dig into that in a bit. And now I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
Hello, everybody. I hope you guys are having a great day wherever you are in the world. I see a lot of friends in the chat. So hello, hello. Oh gosh, what to say, right? What needs to change in our industry with singers? What needs to change? Why should it change? And then how are we going to change it? Because this is a big thing. And as other panelists have already said, we kind of were thrown into something that we didn't know we wanted to do, forced to do if we didn't want to do, and it kind of seems insurmountable. But the good news about when a huge challenge comes to us and a reckoning needs to happen is that we can do the reckoning and we can change things. So I guess my opening statements are around really starting with why and how we define what a singer is and what success is for a singer. We have created a system that makes our singers need to have ego-driven decisions selfish-based decisions, not collaborative decisions. We've created a system that invites singers to have to be all about themselves. And that is where we get to really take ourselves to task as teachers right now. And that is how I believe we start to change this. So how do we start? We start by redefining the desired outcome. Why are we working with singers? Why are singers working with us? Why are they coming to our programs? I'm an independent studio owner. So why does the singer come to me? And what would I need to do in order to reframe for them what success is for the type of singing they want to do and the type of impact they want to have on the world? So that's where I go with this, is examining desired outcomes and then examining redefining success. Let me look over here at my note real quick. I think this does tie into why we do this, why we are re-examining everything. And that ultimately, I think it's for the good of singers from here on out, because y'all, we need to dismantle the box that we put singers in. We have to dismantle this pipeline. We have to dismantle this idea that there's one way to be successful and to use your literal voice and your movement-oriented voice in the world. We've got to we've got to give people back their identity. That's what we need to do. We have to give people back their unique individual contribution within a context of collaboration. And that is the opportunity that this event affords, because we have pushed pause on the way that we are doing this in the past. And we get to take ourselves to task and figure out how to do it differently. So, I mean, practically speaking, how do we do it differently? Gosh, any way we want. And that's really cool. Any way we want. My encouragement to everyone listening in is throw away whatever idea you have in your head about what teaching voice means. Just throw it away. Throw away the model, throw away how long a lesson should be, throw away how often you should meet with a person, throw away when you should meet with a person. Just throw it all away as an exercise and start with what is the desired outcome for the singer. Then when you start with the desired outcomes, we can say, great, what are the tools and systems that we need in order to produce this desired outcome? And I think we are all very smart and very creative people who will start to blow the lid off some traditional models that will be more appropriate for the learning abilities of current students, that will be more appropriate for the time demands in our current cultural expectations of time and space, and will be more appropriate for how brains have developed and how they learn. So I really want to just get to the conversation too, so I'm going to leave it there and be done. Thanks for letting me yak with you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I love that positive outlook. It's a clean slate, so much to look forward to. All right, next, let's go on to Aaron.
Hello, and thanks for joining us all today. I'm Aaron Humble, coming to you from the Twin Cities in Minnesota. I teach at Minnesota State Mankato, where I am both a voice professor and the director of the choral program there. My entire career, I've sort of had a leg in choral music and a leg in vocal music, and I keep waiting for the day when I have to make a choice where I either fully identify as a singer or a conductor. I haven't had to do that yet, and I hope that I never do. With all of the turmoil that we're facing in our world, as we take a hard look at some of the systematic injustice and racism that's built into our communities, into our government, into our policing, and into even our music and the institutions that many of us work for and have sung for, we start asking ourselves a lot of questions. And I started asking myself some of these questions during the beginning of the COVID crisis, and the questions have just turned to be more introspective and more reflective at this point. I suppose you would call it an existential crisis when you look around the world and you see people sick and dying, not getting the support that they need. It's really easy to ask the question, well, what does singing matter? When you have something this serious and this grave, when you have systematic racism and the oppression of people for hundreds of years in a country, what does singing even matter? But over the past week of a lot of turmoil here in Minnesota, I have realized how important singing is and how hard it is to not have the opportunity to come together and sing in community, which is a balm. It's a healing balm that we need so desperately right now. And to not be able to do that has really been crushing. So I know I have a lot of ideas about programs that I want to do when we can come back together, and when we have figured out how to do that together in a safe and effective manner. I appreciate what Stephen said about triage. That's how I felt for the rest of the semester after we went online. And I think moving forward, it's going to be a challenge for all of us to move past that and figure out ways that we can create together in a way that is professional and striving for excellence, but still being sensitive to the challenges that all of our students are facing. I know that a lot of discussion has happened about how can we, when remote learning is involved, how can we really have equity in our grading when students may not have access to all of the tools they need to create a professional product to be evaluated for an academic setting. So thinking into the future, I can't help but think from the professional world how we are going to be facing some serious budget restraints, how funding is going to be scarce, and how people are going to really need to be nimble to find ways to create, even within the oldest institutions, which will be facing a lot of financial pressure. During the last financial crisis that we had in the United States, I was still singing with Cantus, and because our fee was relatively affordable and because we were a small and nimble organization, we were able to weather that storm pretty effectively. Of course, you don't have, without being able to gather for concerts, that's a different story at this point. But I think the nimble organizations will be able to fare the best. And I think that as we start talking more about what it means to be an entrepreneur, at Minnesota State Mankato, we have a large music business and music industry program. And we talk a lot about entrepreneurship, but so often those discussions are around popular music, folk music, things that are not happening in the classical music space. But we really need to be talking about how we are creating new opportunities and how we are bringing that spirit of entrepreneurship to the public sphere in classical music. Here in Minnesota, we are really fortunate to, I believe, be the only state in the United States that funds the State Arts Board through sales tax. And so there is a robust philanthropic and grant community here, and access to very young artists, and access to the largest and most established institutions in our state. And so as we graduate artists, we have to teach them how to seek that funding, how to create, and how to bring new opportunities. Just like my fellow panelists here, I've been wondering what we can do during a crisis, and I have really turned my attention towards building the musical skills that singers desperately need to be competitive in a very tight market for artists, even in the best of times when we're not in the pandemic that we're facing now. It's competitive, and you have to have something that will make you stand out. So while we're alone, while we're socially distanced, we can encourage our singers to be working on their piano skills, to be more proficient. We can encourage them to work on sight singing and on musicianship, and provide them with tools that will help them bolster the great voice that they may already have with the musicianship they need, so that when they do have an opportunity, they can be proficient, they can come in and they can perform, they can hit the right notes and sing the right rhythms, and also be a nice person, and that will get them asked back. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Aaron. And last but certainly not least, Robin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Women on the Verge for having me today. I am the executive director of Against the Grain Theatre, which is a small opera company based in Toronto, and a fairly recent graduate of the University of Toronto Faculty of Voice program. Today, one of the things I wanted to talk about was the impact of COVID-19 on singers in our industry right now. So there are a number of young singers who recognize that because we cannot gather in person for the upcoming months, perhaps years, due to the spread of the virus, that many companies are requiring closures and they're canceling their seasons. So that means we've got a large contingent right now of young artists who are asking themselves whether or not it makes sense to stay in the industry when they know that they're missing ample opportunity to gain those early professional opportunities. So we're spending 4 to 6 years, perhaps more, training these performers, and now they're considering leaving the business. So in considering that, I thought about some of the things that would have made sense for me in those shoes, in the shoes of a young singer, and the kinds of skills that I would need now moving forward, knowing that we're in a different world than we were in 3 months ago. So the first of which is diversification of academic material. And I feel very strongly that if we are committed to training performers, we must commit to training them so that they can function in the industry that we're pushing them into. So while many schools have a business of music course, I think it's important that we make available the resources to our students so that they can understand finance and fundraising and contract negotiations, so that when they're in those early stages of their career and they don't have the guidance of an agent, for example, they're able to make some concrete decisions on their own about what kinds of work might be beneficial to them and to their career path. Another thing that I've considered is for those of us who run summer programs. So I know that right now, a lot of summer programs are either have canceled for the year, or they're trying to figure out in a massive rush how to move their programming online. And I think that we have an opportunity to educate ourselves and also our students on how crucial it is to understand recording as a young singer. So one thing that I would suggest exploring is how do we give our students the opportunity to record their own audition videos, or what resources do they need to research technology that's optimal for the delivery of their particular voice, or how do we make sure that they're working at optimal audio, because of course many of these platforms are in existence for optimal video quality and not necessarily audio. So exploring some things like that I think will be very important as we move forward, and important on both behalf of the teacher and the student. Finally, I would encourage that teachers engage in conversations with their students about the types of opportunities that exist outside of the performance realm. So in many cases, the private teacher acts as the confidant of the young singer, and the academic programs are primarily focused on performance practice, but why not encourage what other opportunities lie outside of the arts? So not necessarily in the classroom, but what opportunities can we encourage our students to take on outside? So connecting them with arts organizations in their area to volunteer or work with a mentor. encourage them to curate their own recitals and concerts without the limitations of university recitals, encourage them to audit lessons and train their ears so that they could potentially have a strong foundation in teaching, encourage them to work across different genres. I think when we give our students the permission to look beyond what the next performance is or the next repertoire class and understand how they exist within the larger ecosystem of our industry, we have a great opportunity to give them the skills and the confidence to find their belonging within the industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin. Yeah, as a recent grad myself, a lot of those things resonate really strongly with me as well. So thank you everyone for your honest and thought-provoking opening remarks. There is so much to talk about. So now let's get into the nitty-gritty. I'll ask all of our panelists to turn their cameras on so we can have a discussion. And the first question I wanted to ask, I think it builds upon a lot of your opening things that you've mentioned in your opening statements, but Elizabeth, you talked about how do we create not only resilient musicians, but resilient and flexible individuals who have then the tools to go out and be successful in the ever-changing market. So I wanted to dig into that a bit more and ask your thoughts on what the role of the private studio teacher is in that process.
Okay. I always say that teaching is sort of like parenting, and I've been fortunate to, or I am fortunate to be a parent. I have 2 teenagers, and I will say that my teaching has evolved as my children have grown. I'll also say that I've matured. Hopefully my friends and colleagues will agree that I have matured as a teacher. And some of that is also because of how my children have grown and how I've experienced them in the education system. And so when we talk about, or when I talk about the idea of resilience and flexibility, I think I always come back to being a parent and the idea that we have to allow our children and our students to fail. They have to learn how to suck at something. Now, if my mother's watching, she's going to say, "Oh, Elizabeth, watch your language." But it's true, is that if you don't know how to be bad at something, then you don't know how to get out of that, to make yourself better. You haven't figured out how to climb out of the hole, how to learn the skills, etc. And I can tell you, I have a son who's pretty smart, and we've struggled with getting him to go past where he's really good at it and better than everybody else, but then pushing himself to being better if that's what he really wants. So I see that in my own children, and I see that in my studio, in my singers as well. And so that's when you have those hard conversations. But coming back to encouraging failure, of course, I'm not asking anybody to fail in a way that is going to be harmful, but what does it mean to fail in a safe way? I mean, I think that it depends on the person. And I think, again, in the studio, you start to understand your singer when you've had them for, as I do in undergrad for 4 years, you understand what threshold that can they take. And maybe you have that conversation about, you know, you have the potential to fail here. How's that going to look for you? So that's the first piece of resiliency that I think is really important. And I know that we've had, as colleagues at my faculty, we've had conversations about how that this generation of young people don't know how to fail and don't have resiliency. And I want to speak to that in my next point, which is give them autonomy. Because so often these kids are coming, especially these undergrad kids, are coming from what's been termed as a snowplow parent. And we see that, I know you private studio teachers see that all the time. Fortunately, in university here, I assume it's the same in America, but in Canada, once you're 18, you're an adult. So anything in school means that your parents can't get access to that. So the kid has to give their parent access to files and things like that. But I cannot tell you the number of parents that have called me, and I know it's the same for my colleagues, that have called me to say, how can my kid get in your studio? What do they need to do to get in your studio? And I'm pretty blunt when I say, I don't talk to parents. Tell your kid to email me or call me. And give them the autonomy to make that decision themselves. The relationship between the student and the teacher is is that intimate relationship that you build over 4 years. You don't want the parent in the middle of that. I could go on quite a bit about that, but I'll leave that at that, because I really think that autonomy is really important for these young students, especially those that we say don't have this resiliency. My next thing is give them access to us, give them access to yourself outside of the lesson. Yes, we are so overwhelmed. We're constantly being, stuff is coming at us always. But I think giving them access to us outside of the lesson is really important so they feel supported. Create boundaries, obviously, maybe not obviously, but it needs to be said. But I think that it's important for them to understand that you're there and you have their trust, and they have your trust, and that you have their best interests at heart. Because I think often we come from a culture of voice teachers being the always right and only knowing everything. And if we can come to them outside of the lesson and be human, then that can help change this dialogue and hopefully make them more resilient, and then maybe change the culture in the studio. Open up your network to your singers. I think we do that already, but I think opening up your network, and I think that's part of, as we teach for a long time, our network increases. And, I have 2 former students on this call today, or on this panel today, and that's part of opening the network. And they're part of the pipeline of network for those next students that are coming in, that when I have a singer that is interested in arts management or arts leadership, I have people that I can send them to have those conversations, especially when we don't have those programs in our school system or in our programs. And then from a practical standpoint, because I know there was some Facebook group chat about what are the practical things, what are the things I can take away from this? And we always need a handout at the end of a class we go to, right? So my handout is that in the class that I teach, and I think we can do this in the studio, and I'd be curious to hear Michelle's thoughts on this. I know she'll have some thoughts on this. But in that idea of mentoring singers beyond great evals, you can tell my eval is a big deal in my studio. But in my class, things that we deal with are resume and bio writing, which seems really obvious, but it's important. Learning to write a professional email. And again, I realized, from lots of conversations with my colleagues, that students don't know how to address their professor or somebody or anybody who isn't their best friend in an email without going, hey, how's it going, right? So how do we send a professional email? And I have a great article that's called How to Email Your Professor Without Being Annoying AF. So I set the tone with that, and they follow it. And it's amazing, because a week after they've got that article, I start to get emails in the format she suggests. And it's really great. So feel free to email. I can send that article out. It was published on Medium, on the website Medium, back in 2016. I also feel really strongly that we're in this online world, and even more so now. We need to help them curate and understand how they want to share themselves on social media and online. So my class, for instance, has its own Instagram account, and each student is responsible for a week of content, and we discuss, how do you want to share yourself as an artist? And of course, because it's school, you got to give them points that you're going to mark them on and things like that. But I can tell you that if they do the 5 posts, they're going to get a 5 out of 5, right? It's not about the mark, it's about the process of thinking about and then reflecting back. Some of them don't want to be on social media. Some of them feel that it creates anxiety, and we all know about that. And then I'm gonna hit Robin's point, which I think is even more important now than ever, especially as we went into, like Stephen called it, triage mode at the end of the year. I couldn't do in-person exams, so I had them do a video. Oh my goodness, we assume these kids know things. They know nothing. They have no idea how to take a video off their phone and post it on YouTube and send you an unlisted link and not screw it up 6 times and make 17 emails from their prof saying, can you fix that, please? We assume they know these things, and they they don't. I think they're going to get better through this, but I think we have to stop assuming that they're good at technology, because I can tell you my kids are on their phone all the time, but they don't know how to answer the phone. They don't know how to send an email. They don't know how to do any of that stuff if we don't help them curate that. So those are some of my really hard points. And then I think it's releasing them from us to learn from others. And the biggest gift that my mentors in my undergrad and my grad student days the biggest gift they gave me was saying, go work with somebody else in the summer. Go get information from somebody else. Do not tie them to you. They are not your child. You don't want them to be your child. Don't tie them to you. Let them go off and get information from someone else, because we don't have all the answers. And that's our whole point today, is we don't have all the answers, but we've all got experience to share. So I'll stop because I think I'm starting to preach, and I'll stop.
No, thank you. That's great. And yes, as an alumni of your studio, I can say that I am very grateful for the opportunity to fail and to explore so many other different things, because I don't think I'd be doing all the different things that I'd be doing now. So yeah, thank you. I want to move on to one of our questions that was posted in our Facebook group, actually, from Mia Bach at the University of Toronto. And it really kind of just springboards off that of your comments, Elizabeth. She writes that it's important for us as teachers to identify the specific hard and soft skills needed in the profession. And I know that this is just the beginning of this conversation, and we could probably discuss these skills going on and on. But Emily, I'm wondering if you could maybe get the ball rolling on some of those examples and descriptions of skills that you feel could be useful for students going forward in light of this pandemic, but also once we adjust to new normal.
Sure. I'm going to just really be quick because I actually want to start a discussion because I think all of us have really good ideas. But we've already talked about a lot about the soft skills, right? And I think the biggest question is, how do we give them those soft skills? But one word I always use, or one description I use with my students, is vocal chameleon. So they have to be able to do lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of different things in a way that they're comfortable, at the same time knowing what their avenue is, but they still have to be able to do it. So some of the hard skills I came up with just really quickly are the marketing aspect, which this is going to be hopefully a topic we address today, and we definitely will do it again, is entrepreneurship. What is that? Is that even something? But marketing falls under that umbrella. So if we really want to talk about hard skills, marketing, websites, all of those things, oh my God, like Elizabeth said, most of them actually have no idea how to do them. Financial classes, we got one in our Facebook group, a question about how do I eat going forward, right? How do I know how to keep my checking account? I'm sorry, I know that I learned how to teach kids how to breathe, but honestly, I'm going to also have to be that person that somehow figures out how to teach them these things as well if we want them to be successful. Improv. I can't improv to save my life. My kids got to know how to do it. So we have to figure out how to do that. Ensemble work, as Erin was saying, too many of us grew up as solo singers and think that that's all there is. Sorry, we have to learn how to sing in an ensemble and learn how to make a living doing it and like it. Working with new composers, somebody already posted a question, either being a composer, so you're creating new work, or working with new composers, so you're supporting the creation of new work. How to commission, somebody already mentioned that, about how do we find the money to do those sorts of things. Commission things, support ourselves in that, commission new composers, support them. Directing, working behind the scenes. I know Stephen will agree with me in this, and he's already working in this in the fall. These students need to do everything. You can't just be the lead in the show anymore. You need to know how to call a show. You need to know how to write a text schedule. You need to do those things. Dance, acting. I know we all think we're going to do the singing acting. You know what? Take an acting class in the theater school. So much better. Working with a microphone, big one. I brought somebody in a couple years ago to work with my students on how to work with a microphone. Again, I don't know how to do it. So I bring people in that know how to do it. You don't have to know everything. The biggest question is, how do we fit this into the education we already have? I know we can do it. That's the big question, but we can. So I'm just going to stop now, and I'm going to turn it over if anybody else has some ideas.
Yeah, does anyone else want to jump in? Or I know in the chat we have a question coming in about about arts entrepreneurship and what that means. And I know that's something that everyone really kind of wants to dig into. So in the chat, we have someone who's, Isabel's posted that in her brief time in arts admin, there are so many young artists who are extremely talented and have potential, but seem to lack the entrepreneurship skills needed to further their career. And I know this is something, you know, we were talking about. Is it enough to add these classes into a vocal performance degree, or, you know, what are the steps going forward? What does arts entrepreneurship mean? Michelle, I'm looking at you, you're kind of smiling. Did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I would love to. So I would really like us to stop calling everything entrepreneurship when it's really knowing how to self-manage or be a micro business owner. Because entrepreneurship implies that you are creating something that you are inviting people in to share with you as a company so that you can sell it and then do something else. That is what an entrepreneur is. It is a person that creates a business in order to sell it, right? So from the get-go, there's already an exit strategy. And I think that this label of entrepreneur puts great pressure on singers, because it's all over the place about what is this big fancy thing that's an entrepreneur. And research shows us that only 5% of people who claim to be entrepreneurs actually have the skill set to do everything they need to do in order to be an entrepreneur. So I would love to first reframe what we're calling these programs, and then get really specific, again, on helping students create desired outcomes for their post-undergrad and their postgraduate studies, and then give them the hard skills around business ownership that they need. And then they can decide as a business person if they are entrepreneurial or not, right? But to go out of the gate with this huge burden of entrepreneur, I think steals our ability to really give them certain hard skills, like how to read a profit and loss statement, how to know the difference between a balance sheet, and how to know the difference between cash flow and budgeting, two different things, how to market, and what's the difference between marketing and selling, because they're not the same thing, right? And I think we get all caught up in telling singers, be creative, do whatever you want, you can make things happen, it's amazing, without telling them how to write a business plan, without showing them what questions they need to ask in order to be entrepreneurial, and to self-assess, am I the person that needs to lead a company and be a CEO? Or am I a person that needs to gather people around me and do something in a partnership? Or do I just need to learn how to self-manage, which would be like some of the skills you were talking about before, you know, how do you self-submit, making sure that your tapes are good, that your recordings are good, your resume writing, you know, those kinds of skills. So I'd like better definition around that, because I'm seeing this all over the place in like music programs. It's like with an entrepreneur track. And I'm like, what does that mean? And then when I ask, what did you learn? It's like no business stuff. And I get worried about that, you know? It feels more like a creative thinking process degree rather than an actual hard skill of doing business degree. From some people, not all people, but just as an, like, just kind of to stir the pot and get us all irritated to talk about these things. And scene, who wants to go next?
So I want to jump in there because I think I'm understanding from you is that we're not the right people to be teaching this either.
Doesn't
necessarily.
Sure, maybe not right now, but maybe we can become those people. I mean, if we're going to ask our students to learn all these new skills, shouldn't we also try to learn some of them?
No. I think Robin has a point. I'm going to like moderate down to Robin because we've had so many conversations about singers not understanding business and this is I feel like this is important when I'm teaching class. And like you say, Michelle, we need to define these things and kids ask questions. And sometimes I don't know. I mean, often I don't know the answer, but don't tell them all.
Robin's going to say something, or Stephen?
I was going to say, did that mean you want me to speak? No, I agree. I think I've been lucky in my life because I grew up in a house where business was the reason why there was food on the table. So my understanding of business process and some of the things that you've mentioned, Michelle, like a profit and loss sheet and how to budget and how to manage your cash flow, those are second nature to me, but they're not for everybody. And I think if we don't start to offer our students an understanding of how to do those things on their own, then they're going to be at a loss when it comes to the times when they feel they need to self-produce so that they can make sure that there's food on their own table. Or if they need to pick up a part-time job in arts admin or not, or in something else in order to live from contract to contract. These are very, very basic skills that we are not giving to our students because we've absolved ourselves of the responsibility that, well, that's not for us. We're not a business school. But if our primary purpose is to prepare performers to go out into the industry, and a part of that is knowing how to manage yourself, knowing how to market yourself as a singer and how to network, we're not giving our students those opportunities. So how do we, and I don't have the answer, but my question is, what are the things that we can do as educators and as organizations to make sure that students have those skills to go into the workforce?
Okay, I think, Stephen, you were first and then Teresa, or? Okay, Teresa, go ahead.
I was going to let Stephen go, but okay. So I think this is all so great. I think this goes back to one of the things Elizabeth was saying about opening up your network. I think it's important for us as educators to self-assess what are our strengths that we can bring. Like, what are we able to go outside of maybe what our specialty is, but there are other things that we're also good at that we can teach. So one of the things in my curriculum is a voice skills class, which is basically a class that I created as a bucket class for like all the other stuff besides diction and rep and all of those other things. And I go in short units where I try to cover a lot of these bases, and it takes a couple of years to kind of get through all, it would take forever to get through all the things that I want to get through. But one of the things that I do at the very beginning of the year is I ask the singers questions. Why do you sing? What do you love? And what are you good at? And I find that sometimes if they're really thinking of like, well, I'm here to sing, they feel like they have to answer all of those questions in the perspective of being a singer. And what I want them to get to identify is who they are and what they're good at, and that they're also a singer. And then maybe I can do a better job as I'm thinking of kind of reframing my curriculum for this next year. I've got this whole document that I have things like if we're remote and if we're in person. What are all of these topics that I want to cover? And self-assessment is a really big part of it, so that they get beyond being like, I'm a good singer, I'm a bad singer, or I don't know how to do this yet, I'm not ready. But also like, what are you good at, and how can we use those skills in other ways? So you can tap into those ones who are really great writers. Okay, well, let's strengthen those skills and see if this works into maybe grantsmanship, you know, writing grants or something in the future. Like if you're really great at, if you're a visual artist also, and that's been something that you felt like you can't pursue because we always make them choose. If they're really great with visual arts, how can we bring that into their marketing and their website design and their, you know, setting up the shot and their audiovisual stuff? Like what else can they pursue in those things that they really love, that gets them up in the morning? They don't have to just think of themselves as, I'm a singer. And I know that's something I've struggled with in my later career, is that, you know, when do I stop saying I'm a singer? I still perform, but I do all of these other things. And I felt like if I ever stopped saying I'm a singer, that meant that I wasn't going to be a singer anymore. I just think it's really important that we can expand our own view of who we are and what we have to offer, and not be afraid to pursue those other traits that we're good at. That's all.
Thank you, Teresa. Yeah, Stephen, go ahead.
I was just going to say that as I'm listening to this, it's striking me how interconnected all of these terms are and all of these questions are: versatility, resilience, entrepreneurship. And I think that we have to be really, maybe the first one that's important for us to define is what is success? Because it seems to me that the other ones are all built towards some sort of goal, and our students are not sure what that goal is. I think that we have to be honest with them. They know that this is a really tough business. They know that we're living in a time where even that tough business feels more tough now. And if success means making enough money by singing alone to sustain yourself for the rest of your life, we all know that that is a very small percentage of the students that we are going to graduate. So before we can figure out what entrepreneurship is, which all seems to be geared towards success, you have to define what success is. And maybe success is a life in which singing is still a meaningful and fulfilling part of you being a human being that's involved in the world. That was not very eloquent. But I don't think success is starring at the Met, right? It can't be that, because what our students hear so often is this conventional wisdom that you should only do this job if it's the only thing you can see yourself doing. And I know what people mean when they say that. They mean you need a passion that will sustain you, right? But what I think the singer hears is, if I care about anything else, then I'm not a good singer. I'm not a good artist. I'm not dedicated enough to my art form. And the truth is that unless you are a fully fleshed out human being who's interested and good at lots of things, you will not be able to sustain a career. Because as soon as you hit that roadblock, as soon as you're in that 90% of the time when you're not singing, you think you have nothing else to fall back on to give your life meaning, to sustain you financially and spiritually through all of those times when you're not singing. So, you know, we don't know what the future looks like. Maybe this is a good time to hit pause and redefine what success in that future looks like. My cat agrees.
No, thank you so much, Stephen. Like, yeah, as a recent graduate, I could say that that was the debate of my whole last year of grad school. It's like, what am I, a singer, an administrator, all these things? And it took some serious soul searching to say, you know, I am all those things, and happy to be so. So yeah, thank you. Why don't we switch over to some of the questions that are coming in through the Q&A. Tom Carl writes, I'm curious to see what the panelists have to say about the power dynamics in yaps. As a singer who's currently making rounds through the yap circuit, I notice so many singers treat their career as a summer camp rather than a business. It seems to me that this is a direct result of low pay and power dynamics of young artists and administrators. How do we convince our artists to take themselves seriously and administrators to value their talent? Now that's a loaded question. Well, maybe
I'll go. I'll start the ball rolling. How's that? How about we take them seriously first? I think, you know, we think we take our singers seriously, but if we haven't done kind of an intake process with them, like whether they're coming, I come from the perspective of a private studio, right? But I would assume that there's some sort of intake process in a university setting where you're getting to know, or a high school setting where you're getting to know that teacher, right? You're getting to know the student, what their needs are, what their desires are. If that's not there, how have we established in the communication with them that they matter? How have we communicated to them that they are important and that they deserve to take themselves seriously? In what ways are we measuring them, right? So I think, you know, I have to look in the mirror. We have to look in the mirror and say, is the way I am treating my students setting them up to always be asking permission? Or am I setting them up to be making bold choices? You know, and is the system, right? Because obviously I would assume from what I've heard from my colleagues here that there's some punishment for failure going on, right? Well, if I know I'm going to get punished for failure and then I go into this YAP program, I'm going to be sheepish. I'm going to be shy. I'm going to be so thankful for whatever I could get, rather than looking at it from a business perspective and saying, is this the right thing for me to do right now with these people because of what they're going to bring me in the future? I'm like waiting for someone to
go ahead, Aaron.
Sure. So I mean, this is a classic problem, whether it's in the YAP circuit or it's in any city where there are too many singers and not enough gigs, is that if there's always someone who's willing to do it for a lower fee, or God forbid, exposure, like all of those delicious meals I've eaten with the exposure gigs, right? Then if you stand on your principles, you just get passed over. And so I mean, that's a really big problem. And especially in a time like this, when we're facing huge potential budget shortfalls and funding crunches coming up, there are going to be all kinds of arts organizations saying, how can we do this for the least amount of money? Well, let's start a young artist program. And then we can get these singers for a bargain price. We don't have to give them any health insurance, speaking to the United States listeners, and just let them sing, because it's a great opportunity. And I don't want to in any way diminish those opportunities, but you know, as we talk about our networks, like, let's keep our ears open to what our friends and colleagues are doing. And if it sounds like exploitation, speak up. You know, anytime I hear other singers talk about ways they can get people to sing for them for free. And I always have to say, no. Would you do that? Would I do that? Absolutely not. And I'm not going to ask my students to do it either. And I'm not going to ask a grad student to do it either, because it's just not fair. And the time to start teaching them is now. And even if that means it's because I'm the artistic director of an organization who is also dealing with budget problems, that might just mean I can't do what I'm dreaming. I have to do something that's within my budget, because I'm not going to exploit other artists to do it.
Or, I love what you're saying, Aaron, or figure out how to get more money, right? Like, figure out, stop with the pie situation, right? I'm not gonna have enough pie, just make more pie, right? So figure out how to make more capital. And what Aaron, you were just saying that was making me think is, when we undervalue the artists and when we take a stand to help them value themselves, like what you're doing, Aaron, is we're teaching them for anything that they choose to do or choose to charge for in the future. So let's say they get to a point where they don't want to be singing anymore. They discover that, you know, they want to go into arts administration, or they want to go into some other area of the arts. Don't we want them, or become a private voice teacher, right? Don't we want them charging appropriately? Don't we want them bringing the entire market system and the entire kind of monetary bar as high as possible, rather than, you know, so people can actually feed, like, what did you say, Emily, earlier? Someone asked, how do I feed my family, right? So we have an opportunity, like Aaron is saying, to teach these people how to, not just in the singing, but give them language and give them empowerment throughout their life.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing quickly, and I know Robin wants to say something, but I totally agree with all of this. It's us to teach them how to value themselves, right? As artists, as people, all of those things. But we also, I believe this actually has to come from the top down. Like Aaron said, if you have colleagues that are doing this, if you see it happening, you speak up. I personally believe, and I know it's going to take so long and maybe it won't happen, but I think we need to change the entire audition system. This, like, everybody flies into New York for 3 days and sees everybody for 2 minutes. Like, this is not how it's going to go forward, people. I don't think. We need to have small little opera companies in every town like we used to, producing new works, encouraging people to work and make money doing it and get audiences. These same 10 companies are not going to have to lead anymore. We have to change it from the top down. And so this group is part of that. This group on the chat, my chat's over here, is part of it. We have to speak up. All right, maybe it's over here for you. I don't know, it's over here. So Robin, sorry, I know you have a lot to say about this too.
I just wanted to comment on one piece of this puzzle that I think we're missing, having gone through a traditional university system and then gone into arts administration right away, is that I had no concept of how a company's budget worked, or what pieces of the budget were allocated to what programming. And so I think there's a lot of value as a singer in just having an understanding, not to say that this should be taught in school, but seek out the people who are hiring you and just ask them for an understanding of how budgets work and how are you determining what my fee is. Like simple questions that we could be asking so that we have more clarity and there is transparency. Like, for example, with our organization, we pay according to industry scale. We pay according to the different unions and what they dictate as being required. You know, we're not a huge organization. We don't have tons of money. I wish we did. I would pay everyone tons of money. But, you know, that's just not a reality. And I think if singers think that we're trying to rip them off as a company, then it's not right. We're not. We want you to be able to put food on your table. We want you to be able to pay your mortgage. We want you to be able to have children and support your families. You know, we really care about you being able to do those things. And so it's not that we're trying to rip you off, but in the grand scheme of where money gets allocated, generally it's allocated to the main stage productions. And then therefore, if you're a young artist, then that's just not where the primary focus is within a lot of companies. And so I would be happy to answer questions about budget questions. And I think that having the courage and the confidence to just ask, nobody's ever going to begrudge you that.
All I'm going to say is accountants wouldn't sell each other out, right? They all want to get paid and they all will be paid. This goes back to what Michelle was saying. There's always more pie, right? And everybody can make the money. You just have to figure out how we're going to help you. I know that sounds really loosey-goosey, but I disagree with Michelle. There's plenty of pie.
Yeah, thank you both. I think it's so important to say that because I think sometimes as a young singer, it's your first professional gig. You don't feel like you can ask those questions. So I think that's really important to say. I want to turn back to the chat, another question coming in. It was asked specifically to Stephen and Robin, but I think I want to open it up to everyone. Corey writes, we're getting great advice from everyone on how to adapt going forward. Any advice on how we can affect change in the opera/theater worlds that hire both us and our students? And I think that's, especially as we're starting, with this clean slate going into this new world, that's a great question.
I mean, I've been thinking a lot about change. I've been thinking a lot about change these past few weeks, especially. I think that the problems that exist in our industry, especially with what we've been talking about with Black Lives Matter and with the underrepresentation of Black voices and Black people and Black stories in our art form, this problem has been generations long in the making, and it's going to take lifetimes of commitment from us to ameliorate. It's not going to be fixed with programming in one season or with one star soprano or with one commission from a composer. This is a lifetime of recommitment to this work. And part of that, what I've been thinking in this conversation is that it's on us to plant that seed of awareness in our students too, because they're the next generation that needs to be aware of this and that needs to dedicate themselves. Because I think what we love about opera and about singing is that it's an empathy generator, right? And we're living in this time where we are so thirsty for empathy. But how can we claim so noble a cause when there are people who don't have a seat at the table with us? And I've been thinking about this. I don't have all the answers. I am trying to think of what I can do short term, but I'm also realizing this is a lifetime commitment to this work that we can't solve right away. So change is on all of our minds, I hope, these days. But I really feel that it's important, part of our training, and in the context of this discussion, that we plant that seed in our students as well.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Yeah, no, I think it's something we're all learning and grappling with, and change starts with us. And as opera singers, we are storytellers, and we're stronger when we tell everyone's stories. Speaking of change and tradition, in our Q&A, we've had some questions about traditions and the must-learns, and do we need a leader class? Why do we have to learn the music by Schubert? And that question of must, can we examine that further going forward? And what is the relevance maybe of learning other contexts and styles as we move on to this new modern world? And what does that mean for the singer going forward? Yeah, Teresa.
Talk about that just a little bit, because I think I know I mentioned that in my comments. I feel working with high schoolers, they only know what they're exposed to. So a lot of them that are just starting out have this maybe affinity for a classical sound, but they don't know anything about it, and why would they? So I feel that it's part of my responsibility to say, okay, this is what came before, this is where we get this sound from, and to learn how to do that. But I also really believe in crossover, because I've done that in my own career, and I believe that what we're helping a young singer do, I don't like labeling voices into a particular fach. I don't like saying that they, you know, that they're big or they're small or they're this or they're that. I just like, what is your best neutral? And then where do we go when we're making a more classical sound? Where do we go when we're making a more musical theater sound? Where do we go when we make more pop? How does that work just technically? But your voice and who you are is still at the center of that. But I don't think that we can stretch those muscles or even identify them until we put those different sounds on. So I think we do have to start with the foundation of what that repertoire is to move beyond it. But I also think there needs to be a healthy dose of exploring it. So like our 2 recitals this fall, we did all, you know, Italian art songs, like the 24 Italian, everybody did, you know, some of those. And then we did one that were like songs of social justice. And they had to find repertoire that was written by either a female composer, a person of color, or about an environmental or social justice concept. And it was this really cool program of music that nobody had ever heard of before, but it was still classical art song. And I was like, God, there's so much of that. Like, you know, we just have to know to look for it. But they had to sing the Italian stuff first when they were just starting out, because they needed to find their vowels, you know? So I think it doesn't have to be all the time. It doesn't have to be forever, but I think I do think you have to start there in order to move from it.
Yeah, Aaron, go ahead.
We've been doing a lot of work at Minnesota State Mankato in revamping our academic degrees. And in doing so, we're really trying to open them up and give the students a lot more autonomy and a lot more choice. If we look at the history of art, if we look at the history of classical music, the people that made the biggest impact were the people that were told over and over and over again that they couldn't do it that way. And so we're trying to really look at what kind of a very basic scaffolding can we present to a student and really let them build on that on their own. And if that means that they go out into the world and fail, all right, pick yourself up and figure out how to move on. But it also might mean that we give someone the opportunity to really be innovative and creative, and we teach them how to teach themselves.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Yeah, I just feel like knowing what I know now, if I had known about all the creative ways that there are for you to make a career as an artist, whether it is arts administration, business, or teaching artistry, working in community, social justice art, as broad as we can make that education, the better. Okay, well, we are approaching the end of our time here. It is 4:57. I think we all agree that we could talk on for hours and hours about all these things. And so I want to say that we will continue these conversations. Please keep submitting your questions to us on the Facebook group. If you haven't already, please join us. You can also submit questions to us via email at women@womenontheverge.ca. I want to say thank you to everyone who's tuned in today. Thank you to all of our fabulous panelists for all of your honest and thoughtful words. Thank you to Kate running our chat. And yes, don't forget to head to womenontheverge.ca. You can sign up for our newsletter and you will be the first to know about our next webinar in the series, which will be announced very, very soon. And if you want to go back and watch anything from today, we'll have our webinar up on our YouTube page by Monday. So again, thank you so much. And if you're not already following us on Facebook and Instagram, we are at Women on the Verge. Thank you so much, everyone.